Hello, my name is Steven Torres. I am 28 years old. I work as a freelance carpenter, mostly doing custom cabinets and furniture restoration. I live in a cramped two-bedroom apartment with my college roommate, Roy Robinson, who somehow convinced me that splitting rent in this overpriced neighborhood was a brilliant financial decision. What Roy failed to mention was that his older sister, Evelyn Walker, would be visiting every few weeks, turning our bachelor pad into something resembling actual civilization. The moment I am about to tell you about happened on a Tuesday evening in October. I was running late from a job site, my hands still smelling of wood stain, and my shirt dotted with sawdust. I fumbled with my keys at the apartment door, already rehearsing my apology to Roy for missing our weekly grocery run. The lock finally gave way, and I stepped inside to find Evelyn standing in our narrow hallway, her back pressed against the wall, arms crossed, dark eyes fixed on me with an expression I could not quite read. "You're late again," she said, her voice carrying that particular blend of amusement and exasperation that I had come to associate with her presence in our chaotic lives. I froze in the doorway, my keys still dangling from my fingers. There was something different about the way she said it this time, something that made the familiar words feel weighted with meaning I was not sure I understood. The late afternoon light filtering through our single living room window cast everything in golden hues, and Evelyn looked like she belonged in a painting rather than our cluttered hallway. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you are watching from and hype this video in the comments. I have a feeling you will want to know how this conversation changed everything between us. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because the story really begins 3 months earlier on a sweltering July afternoon when Roy first mentioned his sister would be staying with us for a weekend. I had been living with Roy for almost 2 years at that point. We had met in college, both of us studying business before I dropped out to pursue carpentry, and he somehow managed to graduate and land a job at a marketing firm. Roy was the kind of person who could talk his way into or out of anything. Blessed with the sort of easy charm that made landlords overlook late rent payments and bosses forgive missed deadlines, I was his opposite in most ways, preferring the honest simplicity of working with my hands to the complicated dance of office politics. Our apartment was exactly what you would expect from two guys in their late 20s who prioritized location over luxury. The kitchen barely qualified as such, with a refrigerator that hummed ominously and cabinets that refused to stay closed. The living room contained a second-hand couch that had seen better decades, a coffee table I had built myself from reclaimed wood, and a television that Roy had somehow acquired through a series of trades that I had stopped trying to understand. "She's going through a rough patch," Roy had explained that July afternoon, sprawled across the couch in his work clothes, tie loosened and shirt wrinkled from the heat. "Divorce proceedings are getting messy, and she needs somewhere to decompress for a few days." I looked up from the cabinet door I was repairing, a project that had been on my mental to-do list for months. "She can take my room. I'll crash on the couch." Roy waved his hand dismissively. "She won't let you do that. Trust me, I know my sister. She'll probably end up reorganizing our entire kitchen and cooking actual meals instead of the cereal and takeout rotation we've got going." He was not wrong. Evelyn arrived that Friday evening carrying a single duffel bag and what appeared to be enough groceries to feed a small army. I was in the middle of sanding down a vintage dresser on our tiny balcony when I heard voices in the hallway. Roy's boisterous greeting, followed by a woman's laugh that was somehow both musical and slightly sharp around the edges. When I came inside, wiping sawdust from my hands with an old rag, she was standing in our kitchen, examining the contents of our refrigerator with the focused attention of an archaeologist discovering ancient ruins. "Stephen, this is my sister, Evelyn," Roy said, gesturing between us with the casual air of someone introducing two people who would obviously get along. "Evelyn, this is Stephen, the guy I told you about who actually knows how to fix things." She turned to look at me, and I felt something shift in the air between us, like the moment before a storm when everything goes still and charged. Evelyn was beautiful in a way that seemed almost accidental, as if she had stumbled into her looks without really trying. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore a simple sundress that somehow managed to look both casual and elegant. But it was her eyes that caught me, deep brown and intelligent, with a hint of sadness that she was clearly trying to hide. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand. "Roy told me a lot about you. Apparently, you're the reason this place hasn't fallen down around his ears." Her handshake was firm and warm, and I found myself holding on a moment longer than necessary before remembering my manners. He exaggerates. I just fixed the occasional broken thing. Like that cabinet door that's been hanging crooked for 6 months, Roy interjected, grinning. I fixed that today, actually, I wed, feeling oddly defensive. Evelyn's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that made something flutter in my chest. Well, I appreciate you letting me crash here. I promise I won't be any trouble. That was the first of many promises Evelyn would break over the following months, though not in any way I could have anticipated. She ended up staying for 2 weeks instead of the planned weekend, and by the time she left, our apartment had been transformed. The kitchen cabinets all closed properly. The refrigerator had been organized into a system that actually made sense, and we had eaten more home-cooked meals than I had had in the previous year combined. More than that, though, Evelyn had brought a kind of energy to the space that I had not realized we were missing. She was going through a divorce from a man Roy described as a complete waste of oxygen. Though Evelyn herself rarely mentioned her soon-to-be ex-husband, except in passing. Instead, she threw herself into projects around the apartment with the focused intensity of someone trying to keep her mind occupied. She painted the bathroom a warm sage green, hung curtains in the living room that actually matched, and somehow convinced our landlord to let her plant herbs on the fire escape. I found myself looking forward to coming home in a way I never had before. There was something deeply appealing about walking into an apartment that smelled like whatever Evelyn was cooking, about finding her curled up on the couch with a book, or standing at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables while humming some song I did not recognize. We fell into an easy rhythm during those 2 weeks. Roy would leave for work early, and I would usually head out to whatever job site I was working on around the same time. But Evelyn was a night owl by nature, and I often found myself staying up later than usual, drawn into conversations that meandered from the practical to the philosophical with surprising ease. You really love what you do, she observed one evening, watching me sketch out plans for a custom bookshelf I was building for a client. We were sitting at our small dining table, which she had somehow made look elegant with the addition of a tablecloth and a small vase of flowers from the bodega down the street. I looked up from my drawing, surprised by the comment. I suppose I do. Is that unusual? More than you might think, she said, taking a sip of the tea she had been nursing for the past hour. Most people I know, including my ex-husband, treat work like something they have to endure to get to the good parts of life. But you talk about wood grain and joinery techniques the way other people talk about their hobbies. I considered this, tapping my pencil against the table. I guess I've always been drawn to making things that last. There's something satisfying about creating something beautiful and functional that will still be around long after I'm gone. That's a kind of immortality, isn't it? She said, and there was something wistful in her voice that made me look at her more closely. I never thought of it that way, but maybe. What about you? What makes you feel that way? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if it might contain answers to questions she had not asked yet. I used to think it was building a life with someone, creating a home, a family, something that would outlast both of us. But I'm starting to realize that maybe I was trying to build on a foundation that was never solid to begin with. There was a vulnerability in her admission that made my chest tighten with something I could not quite name. I wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but the words felt inadequate in the face of her pain. Maybe the foundation was the problem, not the building, I said finally. Sometimes you have to tear down to the studs before you can create something that will really last. She looked up at me then, and I saw something shift in her expression, a recognition that made the air between us feel charged again. That's a very Carpenter thing to say. Is that good or bad? It's honest, she said. I like honest. After Evelyn left, the apartment felt strangely empty, despite being exactly the same as it had been before her arrival. Roy and I fell back into our old routines of takeout and television. But something had changed in the dynamic between us. He had started making comments about how I had been different while his sister was staying with us. Observations delivered with the knowing grin of someone who thought he had figured out a secret. You know, she asked about you, he said one evening in late August, about a month after Evelyn had returned to her own life. We were eating Chinese takeout straight from the containers, a practice that would have horrified Evelyn, but felt comfortable in its familiar slovenliness. I tried to keep my voice casual. Asked about me how? Just wondering how you were doing, whether you were dating anyone, that sort of thing. Roy's grin widened. I told her you were hopelessly single and probably would be until someone literally moved in and organized your life for you. Thanks for that glowing recommendation, I said, though I could not quite hide my interest in the conversation. Hey, I'm just being realistic. You're a great guy, Stephen, but you're also the kind of person who could live on foil and peanut butter sandwiches for months without noticing there might be better options available. He was not entirely wrong, but his assessment stung a little nonetheless. Some people prefer simplicity, and some people use simplicity as an excuse to avoid complications, Roy countered, but not unkindly. Look, I love my sister, but she's been through hell with this divorce. The last thing she needs is someone who's going to be wishy-washy about their feelings. The implication hung in the air between us like smoke. Roy was essentially giving me permission to pursue his sister, but also warning me that I had better be serious about it. The weight of that responsibility felt both thrilling and terrifying. Evelyn started visiting more regularly after that, usually appearing on Friday evenings with groceries and staying through Sunday afternoon. She never announced these visits in advance, simply showed up as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Roy seemed to take her presence for granted, but I found myself planning my weekends around the possibility that she might appear. During these visits, we developed what I came to think of as our own private tradition. After Roy went to bed, Evelyn and I would sit in the kitchen drinking tea and talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her job as a graphic designer, about the clients who wanted their logos to pop without understanding what that meant, about the creative projects she worked on in her spare time. I told her about the satisfaction of restoring old furniture, about the meditative quality of sanding and the way different woods had their own personalities. These conversations felt precious to me in a way I could not quite articulate. There was an intimacy to them that went beyond the mere sharing of information, a sense that we were revealing parts of ourselves that we kept hidden from most of the world. Do you ever think about what you want your life to look like in 10 years? She asked one Saturday night in September. We had been talking for hours, and the kitchen was dim except for the soft light over the stove. I used to have a very specific plan, I admitted. Save up enough money to open my own shop, maybe buy a house with a real workshop in the garage, find someone to share it all with. Used to? I shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Plans have a way of changing when you're not paying attention. What about you? She was quiet for a long time, turning her mug between her hands. I thought I knew, but it turns out I was planning someone else's life, not my own. I'm trying to figure out what I actually want, separate from what I thought I was supposed to want. That sounds terrifying and liberating at the same time. It is, she said, looking up at me with a smile that was equal parts sad and hopeful. But maybe that's what growing up actually means. Learning to want things for yourself instead of wanting what other people expect you to want. October arrived with a suddenness that caught me off guard, the way autumn always does in the city. One day it was still summer, and the next I was pulling sweaters out of storage and noticing that the light had that particular golden quality that made everything look like it was being filmed through a soft, focused lens. Evelyn's visits had become more frequent, sometimes extending into the weekdays when she could work remotely. She had set up a makeshift office at our dining table, her laptop surrounded by design sketches and color swatches, looking perfectly at home in our chaotic space. I found myself timing my lunch breaks to coincide with her work schedule, coming home to find her humming while she worked, usually with something delicious simmering on the stove. You don't have to cook for us every time you're here, I told her one Wednesday afternoon, watching her stir a pot of soup that smelled like it belonged in a restaurant rather than our humble kitchen. I like cooking, she said without looking up from her work. Besides, it's the least I can do. You and Roy are letting me use this place as an escape hatch from my real life. Is that what this is? An escape? She paused in her stirring, considering the question. Maybe at first, but it's starting to feel more like, I don't know, like finding something I didn't know I was looking for. There was something in her tone that made me study her profile more carefully. She had been coming around for months now, but I realized I had been so focused on enjoying her presence that I had not really considered what it meant for her to keep returning to our little apartment. What were you looking for? I asked. She turned to face me then, and I saw something vulnerable and uncertain in her expression. I think I was looking for a place where I could be myself without having to perform or pretend or live up to someone else's expectations. The honesty of her answer hit me like a physical force. I wanted to tell her that she had found it, that she could stay as long as she wanted, that I had been happier in the past few months than I could remember being in years. But the words felt too big, too loaded with implications I was not sure either of us was ready to face. You never have to pretend here, I said instead, which felt both inadequate and completely true. She smiled then, the kind of smile that seemed to light up her entire face. I know, that's what makes this place so dangerous. Dangerous how? Because it makes me want things I'm not sure I'm ready to want yet. The conversation hung between us like a bridge that neither of us was quite ready to cross. We went back to our respective activities, but something had shifted in the air around us, a recognition of feelings that were becoming harder to ignore. That evening, Roy made one of his rare early appearances at home, arriving with a bottle of wine and an announcement that he had been promoted at work. We celebrated with takeout from the good Thai place and too much wine, and for a few hours the three of us felt like family of sorts. To unexpected good fortune, Roy said, raising his glass in a toast. To finding what you're looking for, Evelyn added, looking directly at me as she spoke. To having people who make the search worthwhile, I said, trying to include both of them in the sentiment, even though my eyes kept drifting to Evelyn. Later that night, after Roy had stumbled off to bed, Evelyn and I found ourselves cleaning up the kitchen together in comfortable silence. There was something domestic and intimate about the routine. The way she handed me dishes to dry while she washed, the way we moved around each other in the small space without ever getting in each other's way. I should probably head home soon, she said as we finished, but she made no move toward her things. You could stay, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I mean, it's late and you've been drinking. The couch is comfortable. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing something in her mind. That's probably not a good idea. Because of Roy, because of us, she said quietly. The admission hung in the air between us, finally giving voice to the tension that had been building for months. I wanted to ask her what she meant, wanted to push the conversation toward the conclusion that felt inevitable, but something in her expression warned me off. I understand, I said instead, though I was not sure I did. She gathered her things and kissed my cheek goodnight, a gesture that felt both casual and loaded with significance. After she left, I lay awake on the couch, thinking about the warmth of her lips against my skin and wondering what would have happened if I had been brave enough to turn my head at the last moment. The pattern continued for several more weeks, these careful dances around feelings we could not quite bring ourselves to acknowledge directly. Evelyn would visit, we would fall into our comfortable routines, and then she would leave before anything could happen that might change the delicate balance we had established. I started to wonder if I was imagining the connection between us, if the late-night conversations and meaningful glances were just products of my own wishful thinking. But then she would say something or look at me in a way that made it clear I was not the only one feeling the pull between us. You're overthinking this, Roy said one morning in mid-October, watching me stare into my coffee cup with what was apparently obvious preoccupation. Overthinking what? Whatever's going on between you and Evelyn, you both walk around here like you're afraid to breathe too loudly in case it breaks some kind of spell. I looked up at him, startled by his directness. Nothing's going on between us. Right, and I'm the King of England. Roy sat down across from me at the table, his expression more serious than usual. Look, Stephen, I know my sister. She doesn't keep coming back here just for my sparkling personality. And you've been different ever since she started visiting regularly. Different how? Happier, more present, like you're actually living your life instead of just going through the motions. He paused, studying my face. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I did not have an answer for him, at least not one I was ready to voice. The truth was that I had been asking myself the same question for weeks, and every time I came close to an answer, I found myself backing away from it. That afternoon, I was working on a restoration project in my makeshift workshop on the balcony when Evelyn appeared unexpectedly. It was a Tuesday, and she usually only visited on weekends, so her presence caught me off guard. Roy's not home, I said, looking up from the chair I was refinishing. I know. I came to see you. Something in her tone made me set down my sandpaper and give her my full attention. She looked different somehow, more determined than I was used to seeing her. Is everything okay? I've been thinking about what you said the other night about not having to pretend here. She moved closer, and I caught the scent of her perfume mixed with the October air. I realized I've been pretending anyway, just in a different way. What do you mean? I've been pretending that I don't feel something for you. Pretending that these visits are just about having a place to escape to. Pretending that I don't look forward to our conversations more than anything else in my week. My heart started beating faster and I stood up slowly, suddenly aware of how small the balcony felt with both of us on it. Evelyn, I know it's complicated, she said quickly, as if she needed to get the words out before she lost her nerve. I know I'm still technically married, even though it's been over for months. I know you're Roy's best friend and I'm his sister, and that makes everything messier. But I can't keep pretending that this isn't happening. I took a step toward her, close enough now that I could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. What is this exactly? I don't know, she admitted, but I know it's real, and I know it scares me, and I know I don't want to keep running away from it. We stood there looking at each other for a long moment, the city noise fading into background static. I reached out and touched her face, tracing the line of her cheek with my thumb, and she leaned into the touch like she had been waiting for it. I've been thinking about you, I said, finally allowing myself to voice what I had been feeling for months. More than thinking about you, I've been falling for you and I didn't know what to do about it. What do you want to do about it now? It was the question I had been avoiding, the one that would change everything between us. But looking at her standing there on our tiny balcony, her hair catching the afternoon light, her eyes full of hope and uncertainty, I realized that some questions answered themselves. I want to stop pretending too, I said. She smiled then, and it was like watching the sun come out from behind clouds. Before I could second guess myself, I leaned down and kissed her. Soft and tentative at first, then deeper when she responded by wrapping her arms around my neck. It was a perfect first kiss in every way that mattered. Sweet and gentle and full of all the feelings we had been carefully not discussing for months. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing a little unsteadily. So, she said, her forehead resting against mine, what happens now? Now we figure it out as we go, I said, if you want to. I want to, but Stephen, I need you to know that I'm still figuring out who I am outside of my marriage. I don't want to jump from one relationship into another without understanding what I'm bringing to it. I wouldn't want you to, I said, and I meant it. We can take this as slow as you need to. What about Roy? I had been wondering the same thing, but somehow the concern felt less overwhelming now that we had finally acknowledged what was happening in between us. Roy wants us both to be happy. I think he'll understand. You think? I know, I said with more confidence than I actually felt. But even if he didn't, I wouldn't want to give this up now that we've found it. She kissed me again, and this time there was less hesitation and more certainty in it. When we broke apart, she was smiling in a way I had never seen before. Open and joyful and completely present. I should probably go, she said, though she made no move to leave my arms. You could stay for dinner. Roy won't be home until late. That sounds dangerous, she said, echoing her comment from weeks earlier. The good kind of dangerous. The best kind, she agreed. We spent the evening cooking together, talking and laughing and stealing kisses between stirring pots and chopping vegetables. It felt natural in a way that surprised me, as if we had been doing this for years instead of hours. There was an ease to being with Evelyn that I had never experienced with anyone else, a sense that we fit together in ways I had not known I was looking for. When Roy came home around 10, he found us sitting on the couch watching a movie, Evelyn curled against my side with my arm around her shoulders. He stopped in the doorway, took in the scene, and broke into the biggest grin I had ever seen on his face. Well, it's about damn time, he said. Evelyn laughed and buried her face against my shoulder, and I felt something settle into place in my chest, a sense of rightness that I had been missing without realizing it. You're okay with it? I asked Roy, needing to hear him say it explicitly. Stephen, you're the best guy I know, and my sister deserves someone who's going to treat her right. Plus, maybe now she'll stop asking me weird roundabout questions about your dating life. I did not ask weird questions. Evelyn protested, lifting her head to glare at her brother. You asked me if I thought Stephen was the kind of person who would want kids someday. That's pretty weird for casual curiosity. Evelyn's cheeks flushed pink, and I found myself wondering what other conversations about me she had had with Roy that I did not know about. For the record, I said, squeezing her shoulder, I do want kids someday, among other things. What other things, she asked, turning to look at me with curiosity. A house with a real workshop, a garden, Sunday mornings that last until noon, someone to grow old with. That sounds nice, she said quietly. It does, doesn't it? Roy cleared his throat dramatically. Okay, you two are getting disgustingly sweet, and I have work in the morning. Try to keep it down, will you? After he disappeared into his room, Evelyn and I sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us processing the shift that had occurred between us. I should probably go home tonight, she said eventually. I want to do this right. What does doing it right look like? Taking our time, getting to know each other as more than friends before we jump into anything too serious. Making sure we're both ready for whatever this becomes. I nodded, understanding the wisdom in her approach, even as part of me wanted to argue for throwing caution to the wind. How much time do you think you'll need? I don't know. Is that okay? It's perfect, I said, and kissed the top of her head. I'm not going anywhere. Over the following weeks, we settled into a new rhythm that felt both thrilling and comfortable. Evelyn continued her regular visits, but now there was an acknowledged intimacy to our interactions that changed everything. We held hands while walking to the grocery store, kissed goodbye when she left for work, fell asleep together on the couch during movie nights. Roy adapted to the change with characteristic good humor, though he did institute a rule about excessive displays of affection during his favorite television shows. Mostly, though, he seemed genuinely happy for both of us. And I began to understand that he had been hoping for this outcome longer than either Evelyn or I had realized. You know, he's been planning this for months, right? Evelyn told me one evening in late October. We were cooking dinner together, a routine that had become one of my favorite parts of the day. Planning what? Getting us together. He told me he knew we'd be perfect for each other. The first time he saw us talking in the kitchen. I thought back to that initial meeting, remembering the way the air had seemed to shift when Evelyn looked at me. He might have been onto something. Might have been. I turned from the stove to face her, taking in the sight of her standing in our kitchen, wearing one of my sweaters over her dress, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, looking more beautiful than anyone had a right to look while chopping onions. Definitely was, I corrected, though I think we would have figured it out eventually, even without his help. You think so? I know so. Some things are inevitable. She set down her knife and moved closer to me, sliding her arms around my waist. I like the sound of inevitable. Good, I said, leaning down to kiss her, because I have a feeling we're just getting started. The kiss was interrupted by the smoke alarm, which had detected the dinner I had forgotten about while distracted by Evelyn's proximity. We spent the next few minutes frantically waving dish towels at the ceiling and opening windows, laughing at our own incompetence. Maybe we should focus on one thing at a time, Evelyn said, still giggling as she surveyed our slightly charred dinner. Cooking or kissing? Let's start with cooking and see where it leads us. It led us to ordering pizza and spending the evening talking about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears about the future. These conversations had become precious to me, windows into parts of Evelyn that she kept hidden from most of the world. I learned that she had wanted to be an artist when she was younger, but had been talked into graphic design as a more practical career. I told her about my father, who had been a carpenter before me and had taught me that there was honor in creating beautiful things with your hands. Do you miss him? She asked, curled against my side on the couch. Every day, but I feel close to him when I'm working, like he's still teaching me things. That's a beautiful way to think about it. What about your parents? Roy doesn't talk about them much. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, and I could feel some tension creep into her posture. They're good people, but they have very specific ideas about what success looks like. Getting divorced at 32 wasn't part of their plan for me. It wasn't part of your plan either, though. No, it wasn't, but sometimes the best things come from the biggest disasters. She looked up at me as she said it, and I understood that she was talking about more than just her divorce. She was talking about us, about the unexpected gift that had come from the wreckage of her marriage. I love you, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I had said too much too soon. But then her face broke into the most radiant smile I had ever seen. I love you too, she said. I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say it. Why were you afraid? Because once you say it, you can't take it back. And I wanted to be sure I meant it the way you deserve to have it meant. How do I deserve to have it, Tin? Completely. Forever. With everything I have. I kissed her then, pouring all of my own feelings into the gesture, trying to show her without words how much her honesty meant to me. When we broke apart, we were both a little breathless. So what happens now, she asked, echoing her question from our first kiss on the balcony. Now we see where this goes, I said, together. Which brings us back to that Tuesday evening in October when I came home late from a job site to find Evelyn waiting for me in the hallway, her back pressed against the wall, looking at me with an expression I was finally beginning to understand. You're late again, she said, but this time I heard the affection underneath the words, the gentle teasing that had become part of our private language. I'm sorry, I said, moving closer to her. The client wanted to add another shelf to the bookcase, and I lost track of time. You always lose track of time when you're working, she said, reaching out to brush sawdust from my shirt. It's one of the things I love about you. What are the other things? How much time do you have? I looked at her, standing there in our narrow hallway, beautiful and patient, and mine in a way I was still getting used to, and felt my heart expand with gratitude for the series of accidents and decisions that had brought us to this moment. I have all the time in the world, I said. She smiled and took my hand, leading me toward the kitchen where I could smell something delicious cooking on the stove. Good, because I made your favorite dinner and I have something I want to talk to you about. What kind of something? The kind of something that involves making plans for the future. I stopped walking and turned to face her, suddenly aware that this conversation might be more significant than I had realized. What kind of plans? The kind where I stop going back to my apartment every few days and just stay here with you. The kind where we stop pretending this is temporary and start building something permanent. My heart started beating faster, and I felt that familiar flutter of excitement and nervousness that seemed to accompany all of our major relationship milestones. Are you sure that's what you want? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said. The question is, what do you want? I thought about the house I dreamed of buying someday with its workshop and garden, and Sunday mornings that lasted until noon. I thought about the life I had imagined for myself before Evelyn walked into our kitchen and changed everything. And I realized that all of those dreams felt incomplete without her in them. I want you to stay. I said, I want us to figure out what comes next together. I want to build something that we will last, even though it might be complicated. Especially because it might be complicated. The best things usually are. She kissed me then, right there in our hallway, and it felt like a promise and a beginning all at once. When we broke apart, she was smiling in that way that made her whole face light up. So, we're really doing this? She asked. We're really doing this. Roy's going to be insufferably smug about being right. Let him be smug. He deserves to be right about something this important. We stood there for a moment, holding hands in our narrow hallway, surrounded by the familiar chaos of our shared life. It was not the life I had planned for myself, but it was better than anything I could have imagined. Sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones you never see coming, the ones that grow slowly and quietly, until one day you realize they have become the center of everything you care about. Come on, Evelyn said, tugging on my hand. Dinner's getting cold, and I want to hear about your day. What about our future planning? We have plenty of time for that. Right now, I just want to have dinner with the man I love and listen to him talk about wood grain and joinery techniques. I laughed and followed her toward the kitchen, thinking about how lucky I was to have found someone who loved even the most mundane parts of who I was. As we settled in for another evening of conversation and companionship, I realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments I had expected, but the quiet joy of coming home to someone who was always glad to see you. Someone who made even the ordinary moments feel extraordinary. And if you are still wondering whether we made it work, whether love was enough to overcome all the complications and uncertainties we faced, let me tell you this. 6 months later, I bought a ring. Not because I felt pressured or because it was expected, but because I could not imagine my future without Evelyn in it. She said yes before I even finished asking the question. And Roy cried harder at our wedding than either of us did. We still live in that same cramped apartment, though we have talked about looking for a house with a real workshop and space for a garden. Roy moved out last spring to live with his girlfriend, but he still comes over every Sunday for dinner and to gloat about his matchmaking success. Evelyn has started taking art classes again, and our walls are covered with her paintings and sketches. I built her an easel for Christmas, and watching her work at it brings me the same quiet satisfaction I get from my own projects. Some evenings when I come home late from a job site, I still find her waiting for me in that same spot in the hallway, her back pressed against the wall, ready to tell me I am late again. And every time I feel that same flutter of excitement and gratitude that I felt the first time she said those words, because they have become our private shorthand for I missed you, and I'm glad you're home, and I love you all wrapped up together. The truth is, I am late a lot. But I have learned that being late is not always a bad thing, especially when it means someone is waiting for you, someone who has chosen to build a life with you, despite all your flaws and inconsistencies. Sometimes the best things in life are worth being late for. And sometimes being late is just another way of saying you are exactly where you are supposed to be. In the narrow hallway of a cluttered apartment, under the weight of sawdust and unspoken feelings, Evelyn taught Stephen and all of us a truth that lingers long after the story ends. Love doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it tiptoes in through late-night tea, shared laughter over burnt dinner, and the quiet courage to say what you've been afraid to feel. Stephen almost let it slip away, convinced that timing, complications, and his own hesitations made it impossible. But Evelyn refused to let their connection stay buried in pretense. She pressed her back to the wall and said, "You're late again," not as accusation, but as invitation, to stop hiding, to choose presence over perfection. And when they finally did, when they stopped pretending and started building, they discovered that real love isn't about having it all figured out. It's about showing up day after day, in the mess, in the ordinary, in the moments no one else sees. It's choosing someone not just when it's easy, but especially when it's not. So I ask you, when was the last time you almost let fear silence something real? Share it below. Let's talk about the times we chose honesty over hiding, the hallway moments that changed everything. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. We're creating a space for people brave enough to love out loud, to build slowly, and to believe that even the smallest beginnings can become something beautiful. Your voice matters. Let's keep telling these stories together.